To lead today's discussion, it is my pleasure to introduce Electra. Over to you, Electra.
Hi everyone. Hi, thanks JP, thanks for the introduction and thanks for the opportunity today. So today we will be talking to some amazing guests. So we've got Danielle from Revolut, Kate from Nude, and Willem from Shieldpay. And the topic of today's conversation will be legal design thinking in policies and other legal documentation. So if everyone would like to switch on their cameras. Hi. Hi, Willem, you're first in my view, so would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course, yes. Hi, everyone. I am Willem Wellinghoff. I'm the Chief Legal and Compliance Officer and MLRO for Shieldpay. We're a payments and escrow service business that connects marketplaces and professional clients.
Cool. Hi, Kate.
Hi, Electra. Hi, I'm Kate McKay, Head of Legal at Nude, which is a young savings and investment platform startup due to launch its savings and investment products next year.
Cool. Danielle.
Hi, I'm Danielle Coyle. I'm the Financial Crime Legal Counsel here at Revolut. Revolut is an e-money institution predominantly based in the UK and Europe, but we've also launched in the US, Singapore, Japan, Australia, and probably some other places I'll forget about, but yeah.
Cool. Really happy to have everyone here because you're all from the organizations that really need, I think, to have a really good policy program in place, considering the industry that you're in. So before we start talking about design thinking and how to implement a design thinking mindset to the implementation and rollout of policies, I just wanted to talk very briefly about what legal design is, because it is a bit of a buzzword in the legal space, and I think we need to myth bust some of the stuff around it. So effectively, design thinking as a whole is not a new concept. It applies to law as it does to other areas as well. And it's effectively the application of a human-centered approach to problem solving. And that involves stepping into the user's shoes, identifying their needs and devising viable solutions for those needs. And what that means in a more general design area is that before you create a solution for something, you would try to understand what the problem is that the user is facing by really empathizing with them and taking the time to understand what their needs are, what the friction is, and what the problem is around either the current solution or something that they don't have. And it's the perfect marriage with law, policy, and compliance, because well, let's not sugarcoat it. Law is not the most exciting thing, and reading a policy isn't usually top of anyone's agenda for fun. So applying a more user-centric approach to things that are perceived as difficult is really important if we want to be successful in rolling things out that can be quite heavy to digest. So before we go on, I'd like to understand a bit more about how you implement any design thinking in your organizations. So Kate, should we start with you?
Okay, thanks, Electra. I'll go first. So I think that I think it's super helpful to have that sort of discussion from you, Electra, around what is design thinking, because I think it's helpful to use that phrase, but to take a step back and really look at what we're talking about here is so important. I know that I in the past have come across IDEO, which is one organization that's really well known for looking at design thinking, and from my perspective it's really helped me in understanding what design thinking means, looking at their case studies and things, and I think when I've stopped and looked at that, it's really helped me understand where you need to push yourself to genuinely apply a design thinking mindset to what you're doing. And I don't think that it's necessarily some of it's new, and there's new ways that you can push yourselves, but it's almost pushing yourself to the next level of committing to really understanding the reader of whatever you are writing or designing from a legal and compliance perspective. And I think, you know, with that, taking the theme that you touched on, Electra, of user-centric design, and really trying to put yourself in the shoes of the reader and understand what you're trying to communicate to them. I think tools that I try to use within Nude when I'm trying to take that approach are examples are just the language that I use, and that sounds like quite an easy example, but often the language that you use can achieve design thinking, and how do you go about that? Well, I find that bringing other people to the table who are good at writing language in a different way can be very, very helpful. I will often speak to people internally who are charged with copywriting, because they're far better at writing something in an appealing way than I think I can be. And so having someone like that read your writing and critique you, not from a legal perspective, but just from a readability and understandability perspective, I find can be really helpful. You can't have that all the time. You can't pull your copywriters into checking your legal writings all the time, but it's certainly a useful tool that I find. And I think the other piece is just visually trying to understand what you're communicating and how you lay it out visually can be really powerful from a design thinking perspective. You do need to I really need to push myself in order to do that effectively. And if I can have someone else look at something, I always will, especially if they're non-legal, because you have to be really open to taking that feedback as well, and really ask yourself hard questions about what's important from a legal perspective and what's important from a just communicating information perspective in an easy way.
Yeah, and I think that there's a kind of a natural friction there between writing something that's usable and digestible and even attractive versus complying with your legal requirements. So if the FCA is asking you to put something in your policy, you can just tick the box by putting it in your policy. But then the question is, how do you make sure that that's actually rolled into the business and that the business understands their requirements and actually wants to engage with this policy, which will increase their probability of actually complying with it. So Willem, what's your experience with policies and the implementation of a more human-centric approach?
Yeah, I think human-centric approach is the key word here. Is that lawyers often get accused of writing documents or policies that are just too legalistic and hard to understand. So as Kate said, is that kind of user approach of using language that people really understand, and it's just plain English. So the litmus test generally is give something to an 11-year-old. If they understand it, it's a good document. But I think for me, the way I look at kind of controls, we all know what the FCA handbook says. You know, it's quite comprehensive, but you know, taking something like that and applying it to your business really requires a lot of engagement with every stakeholder within the business. So it's all well and good me coming up with a policy, but as you say, if it's not used by anyone, people don't understand it, it's not worth the paper it's written on. So for me, the key stakeholder engagement is people that work every day in your business and understand their role and what they need to execute upon. And it's then building it up together and working with your copywriters, working with those teams and actually creating a document that people really understand from a controls perspective what it's trying to achieve. So that understanding and delivering that kind of training and understanding and actually putting something down on paper that represents what you're trying to execute as a business in line with those legal requirements or regulatory requirements. And it's, you know, you don't do it in one day. It takes time and you iterate upon that. But it requires an absolute engagement across every spectrum of things. Otherwise, you know, every document you write is just ineffective and is out of date as soon as it's released.
Yeah, and I think that's a core principle of design thinking, that it needs to be an iterative, collaborative process, because we're always quite biased in terms of what we think the problem is. and how we think people will perceive the solution that we're contemplating. So unless we get that input from other people in the organization, then it will be difficult to create something that really works. So we've touched upon writing up policies for internal use, but Danielle, Revolut has got a cracking privacy policy, especially the one that's geared toward children. So there's also the external facing element here, and how taking a human-centric approach can really support brand awareness and strengthening. So how do you perceive legal design at Revolut?
Well, I think I joined Revolut 18 months ago from private practice, and we all know as lawyers the bad habits that we pick up when we're, well, maybe not the bad habits private practice would think that it is, but when you're in a fintech where people want language that is usable and is relevant to how people can understand what they need to do, we really take a active role within our legal team in all aspects of it to ensure that the communication that we're sending out, whether or not it's internally or externally or to other law firms or to customers, just ensuring that it actually makes sense. So there was a lot of work done a few years ago on our terms and conditions to ensure that actually you can read them. You know, we've all seen Apple's terms and conditions come up, you know, and you just think, oh, wow, I'm not going to read a 64-page terms and conditions. So they actually spent time to be like, well, what do we need to tell the customer? And how do we actually make sure they understand what we're trying to tell them? And so one of the things when we launched our Revolut Junior product was we had to create a data privacy policy for the junior, for the child. Now, even our most friendly data protection privacy policy that we've already got is not going to be understood by someone who's an 11-year-old, a 10-year-old. So we spent a lot of time drafting it to try and make it think what we think a sort of 11-year-old would understand. But actually, the only way to really understand that was to start testing on them. So we did start testing on a number of work colleagues within Revolut's children at different ages, whether or not it was an 8-year-old or a 16-year-old, of actually saying, do you understand what this piece of paper is trying to tell you? And the feedback that we get from that is just really cements the fact that if you really take a step back and think about what you're trying to achieve and how you want to communicate it, then you can actually come up with a policy or procedure that works.
That's great. That's such a good example, because if you actually speak to the end user and that end user is a child, you're only going to get the truth. So
oh yes, that's for sure.
That's good. But do you think that there's an inherent conflict between what lawyers are trained and kind of rewarded for throughout their careers? And I talk about lawyers, but I also mean any person in a regulated environment that deals with compliance issues. We're usually rewarded for preventing risk, minimizing disputes. And so then when you're asked to write something that's user-friendly, is there an inherent friction and a tension between our duty to preserve the business and protect it versus creating something that makes sense? Kate, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, Electra, and I think that there is probably a degree of tension in there. It goes against the grain of our mindset as lawyers, of what we our raison d'etre and everything that we've been sort of conditioned to, the way our minds are conditioned to work. I think it's true that there arguably is a degree of tension there, but I think that probably my experience is anyway that in some ways is it's not a tension that you only see in relation to writing compliance or legal policies. It kind of goes across the board of your role as an in-house legal counsel in a young scaling tech company. That it's an everyday tension. I think that you see you're constantly questioning yourself, and you do have to be really open-minded and push yourself as well to really question why why you're doing things and which tension should pull you which way and what the right thing is to do. You have to be really ready to question that yourself and proactively question yourself on things and why am I doing this and what is best for what do I have to do and what's the right thing for the business here, and weigh that up in everything that you do. I think others will chat. My experience is that if you're not doing it yourself and thinking that through, then others will do it as well, and you have to be able to respond to that when others raise it as well.
Yeah, and I think that there's a special kind of nature to fast growth tech environments, particularly in more heavily regulated environments, because you've got this desire to protect against all these unprecedented risks that you may not have seen before in your career. You've come from potentially private practice or another more traditional in-house environment, and you're trained in a certain way. And then you've got to switch your way of thinking from I'm here to protect the business to I'm here to enable growth. And design thinking goes to the core of that, because if we're always thinking like lawyers, or as compliance officers, and we're only thinking about what's compliant and how to take the most risk-averse approach, then what you're doing in your mind is that you're creating an audience for whatever it is that you're producing, and that audience is the regulator or a judge. And 99.999% of the time, it's not going to be those people. So you end up excluding the majority of the people that are going to read that product that you've created, in favor of taking the most risk-averse approach. Willem, what's your experience previously been in relation to this, and how does it compare to your experience at Shieldpay?
Yeah, I think, again, it's a great question. And I think, coming on to what Kate said, we're traditionally trained and conditioned to be looking at it from a risk-averse position, because we are there to always advise generally on the kind of pitfalls that you may come across. I think the point of moving into an in-house environment, especially when you're in a scaling, high growth tech, the pace of change you have to deal with. You need to be agile. You need to be able to really understand the nuts and bolts of your business in order to be an enabler and effective. And that comes back to ultimately the way I look at things is, what are we as collectively as a team in the legal and compliance department there to do? And that's to effectively execute upon the business-wide strategy. And from the business-wide strategy, you take in what are the levers or the levers you can pull against to make that strategy work, or where are the risks involved. And from that kind of flow of information and that engagement you have with your commercial teams, your tech teams, just the board itself, it allows you to kind of shape your mindsets differently to enable that kind of growth and mitigate those kind of risks where you see them. And at the end of the day, you document it in order to enable business. And eyes wide, if the regulator or there is a litigation aspect to it, you then know how to deal with that risk, because you have built that flow of relationship to understand where the necessary pitfalls may arise and how you can deal with that effectively. But it comes down to pure engagement, that real understanding, and really understanding the role of what we serve within the company. It's there to enable business, not to stop it. And I think if you come in from a private practice mindset, that sometimes, it's a very hard shift to make sometimes. You do sometimes have, private practice lawyers go like, oh my God, how do I deal with this? But if you don't ever forget why you're there as a business and to help promote the business, so long you've got that mindset and that agility to move at a very fast pace, I think us as lawyers will do well.
Great, thank you. Danielle, what has your experience been in terms of witnessing that friction in the business, if any? Is there any friction between the legal and compliance team and the rest of the organization in terms of moving at a certain pace? Because Revolut's grown really, really fast. So what have you witnessed?
I think as a fintech, the whole premise of a fintech is to make changes to the financial industry. And that also means that we don't need to be doing things in a sort of old school way. But then there is always going to be new products, new financial crime risks. Maybe perhaps what worked a year ago needs to be matured. But I always like to think about myself as like an internal brand. So you never want to be a blocker. You never want to be the one that's always known as the one who's always getting in the way. Like, oh, FinCrime is always blocking us, or legal is always blocking us. You never want to be that person. So you have to really work with the business to get them to understand where you want them to go and how you want them to get there. And it's very much, you have to work as a team. I don't want to stop growth. Nobody wants to stop growth, but we obviously need to make sure that we're compliant. So you have to take them on that journey with you, explaining what the risks are and how you're going to manage them, or if a document needs to be drafted, how you're going to get there. And day to day, at the end of the day, we are regulated entities. We have our requirements that we have to meet, and you can't get around those. It's just how you get to that point. I feel like sometimes actually fintechs can be better at that, because we're always thinking of things in a different way, rather than thinking we need to do X, Y, Z, that's the rules and that's the way it's always been done. We try to use our imagination a bit more and try and process it in a different way, which means that yes, it it will always have the same outcome, but how we get there can be different.
Yeah, but I think that's a really good point. And I think that's design thinking in practice. So trying to apply ways of working that will effectively make the rest of the business understand what it is that you're looking to do, and for you to understand what solution they're trying to achieve, so you can work with them creatively, is something that lawyers don't necessarily ever imagine their career to be. And then you go into a fast growth tech environment, in a regulated environment, and it is really creative. And I think that if you're the lawyer that can apply this design thinking approach to things, which basically means, right, business person, what is it that you want to create today? Let me understand where you want to get to, because they're coming at it from their own angle. They may be coming at it from a technical angle or from a BD angle, and then when you try to understand what it is that they're trying to achieve, that's a really creative process in your head that can happen. And that's around, again, how do I take the law or the guidance and apply it here so that it can work to get the result that we need. And I think that policies are, the way that when someone says the word policy, I just think of a Word document, or at best, a page on Confluence. Is there another way to build these policies so that people can actually engage with them? If we look at today's world, no one wants to sit and read a whole huge document. They engage with information, they digest it really quickly, and within seconds. And it is quite difficult to sort of swallow that we're going to have to move it towards a world where even legal documents and compliance information needs to be communicated in such a sort of Snapchat style way. But is there a solution? Have you thought of anything that you think might work? Kate?
That's a really good question, Electra. I wish I had a eureka solution here right now, but I think what I can say is that it's sort of stating, I think what we've already discussed is that taking ideas from others and feedback from others can be a really, listening to what others in the business say to you about a policy, or how you, and most recently I've seen that in the context of, it's funny that you bring up the word policy. We had a long discussion a couple of weeks ago about what word we could use instead of policy, because you're trying to, and it makes me think that I think for me, it's one of the key things is about the language that you use, because the word policy has so many connotations and sends so many messages just in and of itself. Calling something a policy, or referring in an email, or even if you are referring in a Slack message to, I will send that policy or do that policy, that there's so much, actually, if you stop and step back subconsciously, that says so much. And is there something, I can't say that I've come up with a better word than policy yet, but it's something that I've been thinking about lately, to say what actually can we call it guidance? Well, actually, no, that has a whole other set of connotations and meanings to the reader. But for me, it's about, for me, what makes the difference is being able to is forcing yourself to actually stop and think about these things. So it's a good cultural sign if we are having those conversations about, well, what do we call this, and is policy the right word? That's a really positive thing for me, because it says people are actually stopping and thinking before they just say, right, we need that policy, process it, push it out, move on to the next thing. People are actually stopping and engaging with the content, and we're having the right conversations. And like with anything, there's a constant battle of how much time you can spend on those conversations and what the right things are to do. But it starts then I find to get into conversations about just more broadly culture and the culture that you're creating and the messages that it sends more broadly. So there is a constant battle of where is your time, which I'm sure we're all very aware of, where is your time best spent, and but it is a positive sign, I think, if you can at least acknowledge that you do acknowledge that these things are worth thinking about, at least giving a bit of time to thinking about, I think. But I'm sorry, I don't have a great solution to the question.
I think, Danielle, you said something previously, which I just want to pick up on, talking about when a policy was drafted at the early stages of an organization's inception, and then a year on, you look at that policy and you think, wow, this really needs to be matured now in order to kind of fit our growth. It feels like, having worked with lots of sort of earlier stage scale-ups that scale really quickly while we're working with them, that's just the nature of the beast. It's going to happen in every organization. And at the beginning, when you first draft your policies, you might be pulling stuff off PLC, trying to tweak it so that it works for you, so that you are compliant. And then this second wave comes, where you have the opportunity to review your policies and say, okay, how does this actually fit with my organization? Is that a good opportunity to start taking a real design thinking approach, whereby you might think, okay, well, who did this policy apply to in the organization? Can I tailor it to those audiences? Can I tailor this part of the policy to this part of the business? Because they don't care about all this other stuff. Is that something that you would consider, considering how busy you are, of course, as well, the feasibility? Oh, Danielle, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
My AirPods ran out of battery, sorry. That'd be why. Yes, definitely. So sort of, obviously we've grown very fast, and every year we do our review of our policies, as any sort of other financial institution does. But actually in the past year, we've really sat down and said, actually, what do we need in this one document? What do we not need? Have we got 5 different policies which all sort of say the same, but are relevant to different people? How do we maybe just put that in a centralized document? And how do we actually get rid of the stuff that's maybe not necessarily relevant? I think, and I've seen it sort of in private practice as well, when you have sort of smaller financial institutions who are very much at the start, it is that very tick box exercise of having your AML policy that, yes, meets every single requirement that you need, but it's not adapted, and there's no thought into actually, but how is that relevant to my financial institution? So we've spent a lot of time just maturing and actually just sort of getting things into a position where it's a lot clearer and it's a lot more relevant, and it makes really specific sense to Revolut, but also to whoever needs to read it. I think one of the things, and I was just thinking about what Kate was saying about actually how it can be quite difficult to come up with these ideas of how you can make, change your policies and make them sort of more exciting and stuff. I think it is very difficult with policies, because they are your baseline of what your financial institution it wants to do. But what we've done with our procedures is actually try and make them more relevant to the actual teams that it's from. So your procedures are obviously how you're implementing your policies. So we try and use stuff like pictures or videos or more of a Q&A to sort of really try and actually help people to understand what we're asking them to take on board. And we found that approach has worked a lot better than just sort of saying, these are the steps you have to take and that's it, and we don't give you anything more. If people really understand the policy, even if it's sort of abbreviated down just for the relevant team, then they can really understand why they're doing a process a certain way.
Yeah, that's really good, because that's that's not just design thinking for the sake of it. That's actually increasing the probability that you will comply and that the business understands what it is that it's doing and why. Willem, have you had any similar kind of experiences?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think the point you said, the why, is a really good question to always start off with. So why do you actually have these documents? And I think that the answer a lot to is, do we need to have them written down? Yeah, I think that they will always have to be written down. It's how you deliver upon them and why you need to deliver upon them is the question you really need to ask yourself. So, you know, in similar ways to what Danielle was exploring, I mean, and policies, we don't really call them policy per se, we call them framework services, because it actually sets out the framework for example, payment services or safeguarding or financial crime. So we kind of set it, ring fence it as framework services. And the way we kind of looked at it, yes, you've got your framework policy and your principles around it, but then how we've engaged internally on it is looking at more gamification type scenarios. So Danielle mentioned it, quiz type things or videos, you know, pictures. You know, we've done the same thing, looking at what, you know, even what services are available to us to allow people to engage with it and test them upon it, because that's really how they can put things into practice. Because if they don't have the knowledge, no matter what's written down, it doesn't really matter. If they don't have the knowledge and you don't collaboratively work upon the documents and the delivery upon it, then what you're going to put in practice actually falls down by the wayside from what you've documented. So the delivery of how you engage on your policy, I think is absolutely crucial. Whether that's to regulators or internally, I think it's very important, you know, you don't create a distinct separate framework for one audience to another. You want to try and harmonize it as much as possible so that people really kind of clearly understand how you operate as a company on that. And yeah, we try different techniques. So like the gamification, putting a game in, you know, creating an app, even if it's just very rudimentary, you know, to try and get people to read certain statements and then answer, you know, questions on the back of it, and then making a little bit more of a game type of scenario to it. Of course, takes a lot of time, a lot of experimentation. But if you don't adopt those kind of mindsets, you know, your delivery of policy or controls of your framework services, as we call them, just is not effective.
That's great. I love the idea of gamification. I think that's the future of law compliance and anything that businesses don't deem to be the most exciting area of the work. Cool. So I think that what we've concluded is that there are kind of three areas. There is the three areas that we need to be mindful of. So the first is, what do we need to do to comply with the regulations? We can't deny that that's the most important thing when it comes to drafting policies and creating processes. So we can't compromise on that, particularly in a regulated environment. The second piece is, how do we make this effective? So it's not even just about design thinking for the sake of it. As I said earlier, it's about how do we make it more effective? And the way to make it more effective is by taking a really human-centric approach to the design of the policy, to the extent that that's possible. But Willem, what you said is spot on. It's the delivery of that policy and the communication of that policy, and how you get people engaged and appeal to parts of their brain that a plain old policy wouldn't. So gamification, design. We were also playing with the idea of something that looks like a Trello board. You can either do that on Jira, like a Kanban board, where you would say these various teams, this policy applies to this team in this way and this team in this way, and you would deliver this as part of an onboarding program, and people would tick off the various cards, which kind of plays into gamification because it forces you to, it's quite satisfying to mark something as green and done, and that interactive kind of approach to delivering that policy is much more engaging than just reading a long document. So I think that those are the three areas, right? But when it comes to the delivery, we've talked about training, and we've talked about gamification through the use of probably technology. Kate, have you witnessed or seen anything else that might kind of just make it a bit more engaging for people? Or
I think that one of the most effective things that I've experienced and used is just again, it comes down to just communication. So helping people, spending a little bit of time explaining to people and framing to people why they are being sent these training modules or whatever they have to read or whatever they have to do, like the part that you do before you actually deliver that, or as part of the preliminary part of delivery, is so important, because I found that using tools like particularly in a fintech where some of the people that you're working with do have experience of working within a financial institution, and the fact that you're regulated, and the fact that that's a challenge, and you need to be mindful, everyone needs to be mindful of that. Some people don't come with that experience to a fintech, and so you're taking them on a learning journey of what it means to be part of an organization that's subject to sort of heightened rules and regulations. And so it's vital, I think, to explain to the audience, to the team, why this is important to Nude or to your organization. And I found that that's been tremendously helpful, and also very revealing, because I've really learned that people, like, there's a real appetite and hunger for people to learn, which I think is like that there's something really unique in that, and I try to capitalize on that, because you've got an audience in the business where, in my experience, people are really hungry to learn and to understand why this is important. And so you've got that. I see it as an opportunity to build the relationship between legal compliance and the business more broadly, to help them see that actually legal and compliance can help me, and they educate me and they help me, and I understand exactly why they're doing what they're doing or telling me what they're telling me, and therefore there's broader implications of that, in that you've built a relationship and you're seen as a trusted person and a helpful team that can only stand you in good stead in the longer term. So I think helping to explain to people and educate people why you're going to put them through a training program, or why it's important they read and adhere to this policy, is really important. And the language that you use to do that as well is important. I found that helping people, explain to them that I'm going to empower you to do your job better, actually, is a really useful tool. I think there's other more, when we talked about this previously, Electra, you've got good suggestions of the flip side of that, but I've seen I'm going to empower you as a really valuable thing.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that kind of brings me nicely to the next point that I wanted to raise, which is, how do we get into the minds of the people that we're trying to deliver these policies to really understand their needs, but also their fears? Because as much as someone might not want to read a 42-page policy, they definitely want some certainty around how they should and shouldn't do their job. And that's particularly relevant in a fast growth tech environment where you get all these new people joining all the time. No one really knows where to look for stuff. Everything's really fast paced, and everyone's working under this kind of like a premise of uncertainty, and that creates stress. So what we could offer people with this really clear way of communicating a policy is that certainty that they crave in their day-to-day. That's a huge value add that you could provide. And that you've got the content, but because the delivery isn't necessarily human-centric, designed for that person, it's not landing and it's not delivering the value. Danielle, have you experienced the same sort of feeling in the organization, that there is a level of uncertainty that your team can help to give some comfort to?
I think what's really nice about the people who work at Revolut is everyone is so keen, and especially if you think about the people who the majority from a financial crime side, the policies, maybe day to day they're actually dealing with it, is our agents. And whenever I sort of sit down with them, and or someone on my team sits down with them, and we communicate why we're doing something a certain way, and actually the enthusiasm that they have is they love to learn, and they love their jobs. So actually, a lot of the time, sometimes you can get that bit of annoyance of being like, oh, why have they introduced this, or oh, why have they done that? And even from when I was in private practice, and sometimes, you know, you get given a bit of a mundane task and you think, ugh, why do I want, like, you know, if you don't have the context, then it can seem a bit boring. So actually spend a lot of time sort of explaining to our agents why we need to do this a certain way and why that's a good thing. And, you know, if they don't understand anything, to come to speak to us. And actually then we get into a position where, rather than it's someone from legal just saying, you must do this, that's the rules and that's it, they're the ones that are coming to us and being like, oh, actually, we think if we did it like this, it would be a better way around of doing it. And then we've opened up a dialogue and we're working as a team to create something. And I then understand what they want more, and then they can understand where I'm trying to get to. So it's that whole, if you can communicate and work together well, then while, yes, we are very fast paced and things do move very fast within Revolut, everybody really wants to work as a team to make a process better or to make it more efficient. And they'll very much will be wanting to be very proactive with you. And I've never really come across at Revolut where it's just like, this is my job, I will just do what I'm told to do and that's it. Our agents are so excited, and, you know, they'll come to me and be like, oh, have you seen this has changed? I saw this in the news. And I'm like, yes, I'm working on it. We've got like a meeting next week of it. And I think when you involve people in discussions, then they don't feel like it's an authoritative sort of saying, you know, you're the legal counsel telling us what to do. They feel part of the team as well. And they feel part of Revolut, which is the most important thing. And that's how you really can get across your policies and procedures a lot better, because they understand why it's there.
Yeah, I suppose that's compliance by design, isn't it?
Yeah.
Willem, is everyone, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, no, definitely. And just to add on that, I mean, we're all social beings, right? We love to communicate, and quite often you picked up on a word, fear. And a lot of the times people associate compliance and legal with fear, because they're fearful of making a mistake. And this is where I think culture comes in quite importantly, and of having an engaging culture towards the legal and compliance points of view, right? So the way I look at things is, I'm not a gatekeeper. We're all gatekeepers in this, because we all keep the business afloat, and that's ultimately what we're designed to do. But for me, I love to have a culture of, I want you to challenge the status quo. Doesn't mean what we say goes. I want you to actively take some level of accountability for that, using that engagement and using that open communication channel to say, how would you go about this in a better way? Is there something that we can do better? And having that open and honest dialogue and keeping each other honest throughout that process, I think is really quite crucial to really embed that kind of element of being able to positively engage with compliance by design in that sense. And allowing people to make mistakes. Everyone is human. We all make mistakes. God, I make mistakes every day, but I won't be walloped around the ear with a whip. You know, it's trusting each other to allow that kind of culture of engagement. And it's okay to make a mistake, but let's see how we can then effectively reduce that mistake going forward by looking at different things. Was it because the policy said something? Maybe it's not right. And it's allowing that platform, I suppose, for challenge.
Mm-hmm. Great. I think one of the challenges that we always get when we're advocating legal design as being imperative, not just because it makes things look good or because it helps build company brands, but because it really does assist in ensuring privacy by, not just privacy, compliance by design. The reason for that is that if you don't get people engaged, as you said, Willem, if people don't feel the accountability, they just probably won't do it because they don't feel like they should, or that they need to, or they don't understand it, or it goes into the too difficult bucket and they don't really look into it. So it's really important, to Kate and Danielle's point, to provide that context before this stuff's communicated, and that is design thinking, that is taking a human-centric approach. And ultimately, all boils down to being highly empathetic and understanding of the fact that these areas can seem quite daunting and can provoke fear in people. And that's just the human response to things, that people aren't necessarily very willing to say, do you know what, this is really scary and I need some help with it. So it's important for us to recognize it and be empathetic towards that as the natural response, and provide people with that support through our communications. Just conscious of time, there are 10 minutes remaining, so if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A chat function, and we'll try to leave a few minutes at the end to go through them. So as I said, one of the biggest challenges that we get is that this is a nice to have. Would you say that front-loading the effort when it comes to designing your policies and processes so that it fits the humans that need to effectively carry them out, would you say that it's a nice to have? What are your challenges? Because I'm sure you're all very busy people. Willem?
Ooh, it's a great one. I think there needs to be a baseline standard, to be applied, and it's an iterative process. There is never a perfection from the foundation, and you will be dealing with and working with people who may not come from the same industry, as payments. They may have come from a completely different industry. So again, it's an iteration process, and you evolve on it over time. And as Kate said, you learn from different people, you learn from different experiences, and you try and apply that. And it's in that way, it's an experimentation that continuously evolves, or evolves rather. And yeah, that's the way I would look at it.
I like that. Take an MVP approach. Don't try and do it all at once. Agreed.
Exactly. It's the agile way of thinking.
Yeah. Kate?
I think you've just stolen my line. I was thinking exactly, I'm nodding away there with you, Will. I'm thinking it's listening to what you hear others talk about all the time and saying MVP, like it's get it out there, because you've got to move at pace and you've got to allow the business to move at pace. So you've got to get something out there. But I think it's the same for me. It's a similar point to the point we made earlier about use of language and the word policy. If you can see that you personally have the right sort of thoughts about the things that are nice to have, and you're starting that thought process and you have that ingrained in your mindset, and those around you do to an extent as well, then I think that's a really positive indicator as well for, well, we acknowledge, we might not be able to do all of this now because some of it is nice to have, but everyone sitting around the table agrees that it's where we want to get to, it's aspirational. And that's a really positive, for me, that's a really positive place to be in your thinking. If you're saying, you're striking the right balance by saying, well, we need to get something out there because we need to allow the business to scale and grow at pace, and we can't hold it back. But actually, we do want to aspire to something better and to the nice to have, and we will revisit that. Coming back to it and revisiting it and not just pushing it down the road is something else. But I think, Danielle, you made a good point about the stage that you guys are at, and having the ability now when you are revisiting things to say, actually, now is the time to look at those nice to haves. We're on to whichever iteration or version you're onto. By that point, you have the space and the time to look at it. But it's a really positive indicator if you've got this mindset from day one, I think, and you at least give some consideration to what the nice to haves are.
Great. Danielle, do you think that taking an iterative approach for incremental improvement is the way forward when it comes to redesigning your policies, or do you have another view?
Well, what I was just going to sort of add what Kate was saying, obviously, about the aspect of maturing. It's always very difficult when you're in an institution to kind of be thinking about actually, where do we want to get to? How are we going to achieve it? And even now, if we're sort of looking at maturing a policy, we're thinking about in 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, where do we already know that we want to get to, and how do we achieve that? And we're kind of already trying to have that mindset, or thinking about actually next time we do a review, we'll think about X, Y, Z. Obviously, you can't do everything, and you don't always have the opportunity to have everything. But we also need to have policies and procedures that work. So while you want to have those nice to haves, you also need to think about how do you get those nice to haves and how do you actually implement them into your future program review. So it's while we're at that stage that we are maturing, it's still a constant sort of battle sometimes to think about the long-term goal. But it's always sort of nice to have what you can have and nice to plan for what you can plan for.
Yeah, and I think in true agile fashion, what we have here is a backlog, which is basically a long wish list. And then when we do our planning, we say, right, this quarter, we're going to save a little bit of capacity to do things that are nice to have, because those things that are nice to have, the thing that might take you just a day to do, makes such a huge impact on the organization as a whole. So I think we have a lot to learn from our colleagues in the development space and software engineers and this kind of more techie way of working, where there's a kind of more of an 80-20 rule, which lawyers are just very uncomfortable with generally, because we're trained to be. You go into private practice, so your training contract, and you're told that if you make an error, you probably will get sued. And you're sort of embedded with this fear, and then you go into an in-house environment and the culture is completely different. So it can paralyze you, and if we're not careful, it can paralyze the business to an extent. So I think that it's important to be mindful of that, and also to be more comfortable with not getting it perfect from the beginning. And I think design thinking is not a nice to have, it's the way the world is going. If we look at even Instagram, had its T's and C's revamped the other day. It's not great, but it is plain English. So that's an incremental improvement from a large organization talking to a huge audience. And I think that in 5-10 years, my prediction is that we'll look at a huge set of T's and C's and think that's absolutely outrageous that anyone would expect me to read that. We're going to expect to get much more transparency in terms of communications when it comes to the important stuff. And I think that that's where the world's going. And as people in these innovative, disruptive businesses, we have the opportunity to pave the way. So there's lots of improvement to be made. I think it's a great opportunity to look at your documents at a point in time where you have that luxury, and to actually make a conscious effort to roll it out in a more human-centric way. So we have one question. How do you convert your internal audit colleagues into design thinking? Often they're more of a blocker than legal risk compliance. Anyone want to take that?
I would be happy to take it. I was just gonna, I don't know whether or not I'm just really fortunate in the sense that I actually have a great financial crime audit team. But I think what auditors need to remember when they come into fintechs is they're sort of used to see, they're normally sort of from the Big Four or something, they're used to seeing traditional banks and traditional policies and procedures, and sometimes we do things in a different way to how they may have seen before. So we do spend sort of a lot of time sometimes going through the process and explaining to them, how we came to be creating this. And actually, at the end of the day, if you work in a fintech, you can't be thinking in that sort of traditional banking sense. You need to think, actually, is this policy still meeting the same requirements? Are we still following it? Is there any gaps? Rather than thinking, oh, well, this is not how I usually like the way of looking at this. This is too simple language. We don't have the whole money laundering regulations copied and pasted into it and every single aspect of it detailed. How do you ensure in a different way that we meet the requirements? So while it can obviously be challenging with internal audit to sometimes get them to understand, but I think it's always reminding them and actually just taking them through the process of, you know, just because we're not doing it the same way as other financial institutions are, that doesn't mean what we're doing is wrong. It just means we're getting to that end goal in a different way. So you have to communicate with them, take them through the journey. And to be fair, like I found that our internal audits are really proactive about working with us to understand how something actually works.
Thank you. And the person who asked the question also said thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all so much for today. I don't know if anyone has any kind of parting words before we go.
Just thank you. Thanks everyone for listening. It's been great.
Thank you
so much, everyone.
Thank you, and have a great festive season.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. That's the first time I've said that.
Thanks for cheering, Electra.
Thank you.
No, brilliant. Thank you very much, Electra, Danielle, Kate, and Willem. Thank you for sharing all your wonderfully practical experiences and, of course, all your time in preparing for today's session. Hopefully you found today's session valuable. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next year, and we wish you all a very Merry Christmas.